There comes a moment in life when the alarm clock stops ringing, but the silence becomes louder than any noise you have ever heard. Imagine waking up one morning at 65, standing in front of the mirror, and asking yourself one painful question: what am I supposed to do now? No office to rush to, no children running through the house, no one waiting for you. Just another quiet morning. But what if this is not the end of your story? What if your most meaningful days are only beginning? Stay with me, because today's story may completely change the way you see growing older. The old wooden clock on the wall ticked slowly. John sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee in his hand. The sunlight entered through the window, but the room still felt dark. Every morning looked the same now. Wake up, sit quietly, watch television, eat alone, sleep again. John was 68 years old. For more than 40 years, he had worked as a bus driver in a small American town. He woke up early every day, wore the same blue uniform, greeted passengers with a smile, and drove the same roads again and again. His life had purpose. People needed him. He mattered. But retirement changed everything. At first, everyone congratulated him. "You're free now, John. Enjoy life. You've earned your rest." But after a few months, rest no longer felt peaceful. It felt empty. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier, after a long illness. His son lived in another state and rarely called because he was busy with work and family. John understood, but understanding did not remove loneliness. The house became painfully quiet. Sometimes John would walk from room to room just to hear the sound of his own footsteps. One afternoon, he looked at an old photo album. Pictures of birthday parties, family vacations, Christmas mornings, smiling faces. He touched one photograph gently. In the picture, he was younger, stronger, alive with energy. He stared at himself and whispered softly, "Where did that man go?" Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And slowly, John stopped caring about things he once loved. He stopped shaving every morning, stopped gardening, stopped meeting old friends. Even food lost its taste. One rainy evening, John sat in his chair staring at the television, though he was not really watching anything. Suddenly, the power went out. The room became silent, completely silent. John sat there in darkness, and for the first time in his life, tears filled his eyes. Not because of pain, not because of money, but because he felt forgotten. He whispered into the dark room, "Maybe my life is finished." That sentence stayed in his mind for days. Maybe my life is finished. Many older people feel this way, though they never say it out loud. The world moves fast. Technology changes. Young people stay busy. And little by little, seniors begin to feel invisible. But life has a strange way of changing direction when you least expect it. One cold morning, John walked slowly to the local grocery store. His back hurt. His knees felt weak. He moved carefully through the aisles, avoiding eye contact with people. As he reached for a can on the top shelf, a small voice spoke behind him. "Excuse me, sir. Can you help me?" John turned around. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, stood there holding a shopping list. "My mom asked me to get tomato soup, but I can't reach it." John stared for a second before slowly taking the can from the shelf and handing it to him. "Here you go, kid." The boy smiled brightly. "Thank you. You remind me of my grandpa." Those simple words hit John harder than expected. "You remind me of my grandpa." The boy ran away happily, but John remained frozen in place. For the first time in months, someone looked at him not as an old man, but as someone valuable. That night, John could not stop thinking about the boy. Maybe he still mattered. Maybe he still had something to give. The next morning, something unusual happened. John woke up before sunrise. He sat on the edge of his bed quietly. Then he stood up, walked to the bathroom, and shaved carefully for the first time in weeks. He looked at himself in the mirror again. The wrinkles were still there. The gray hair remained. But something inside his eyes looked different. Not younger, just awake. John decided to take a walk through the neighborhood park. As he walked slowly along the path, he noticed an elderly man struggling to carry heavy bags from a bench. Without thinking, John walked over. "Need a hand?" The man smiled thankfully. Appreciate it. They sat together for a while. The man's name was Walter. He was 72 and had recently lost his wife. As they talked, John realized something surprising. Walter felt exactly the same loneliness. Exactly the same emptiness. Before leaving, Walter said something important. You know, John, getting old is hard, but getting old alone is even harder. That sentence stayed with him. The following week, John returned to the park again and again. Soon, he started noticing other seniors sitting alone on benches, feeding birds, staring into space, pretending everything was fine. One woman knitted quietly by herself every morning. Another man walked slowly with a cane and never spoke to anyone. Everyone carried silent pain. One afternoon, John had an idea. It was small, simple, but powerful. The next day, he brought a thermos of coffee and extra paper cups to the park. When Walter arrived, John poured him a cup. The two men sat talking for nearly 2 hours. Then another senior joined them. Then another. By the end of the week, 5 older people sat together every morning sharing coffee and stories. Something beautiful started happening. People laughed again, smiled again, listened again. One woman said, "This is the first time I've felt happy in months." Another man admitted, "I thought nobody cared if I disappeared." John listened quietly, because deep down he understood every word. The small coffee gathering became a daily tradition. People brought homemade cookies, old photographs, stories from their youth. For many of them, it became the reason to wake up each morning. And without realizing it, John had found purpose again. Not through money, not through success, but through connection. One morning, a local newspaper reporter noticed the group in the park. Curious, she walked over and asked questions. "Who started this?" Everyone pointed at John. The reporter smiled. "So you created this community?" John laughed softly. "No, I think we saved each other." A week later, their story appeared in the newspaper. The headline read, "Retired man turns loneliness into friendship for seniors." Suddenly, more people began visiting the park. Some came because they felt lonely. Others came because they wanted to help. Young volunteers brought chairs and snacks. A local musician played old songs on a guitar every Friday morning. For the first time in years, the park felt alive. And so did John. One evening, after returning home, John sat quietly in his chair again. But this time, the silence felt different, peaceful, meaningful. He looked around the same house that once felt empty. Nothing had changed physically. The same walls, the same furniture, the same old clock ticking slowly. But John had changed. He finally understood something many people never realize. Purpose is not something you lose with age. Purpose simply changes shape. Sometimes purpose is raising children. Sometimes it is building a career. And sometimes purpose is simply showing up for another human being who feels alone. John smiled softly as he looked at a photograph of his late wife. "I think I'm living again," he whispered. And for the first time in a very long time, he truly meant it. Winter arrived slowly in the town. The trees in the park became bare. Cold winds moved through the empty branches, and most people stayed inside their homes. But every morning, no matter how cold it became, John still carried his thermos of coffee to the park bench. And every morning, people came. Walter was always the first. Then came Martha with her knitted scarf and warm smile. Then Daniel, who once spent entire days alone in his apartment before finding the group. What started as 2 lonely men sharing coffee had now become something much bigger. It became hope. One snowy morning, John noticed a woman standing far away near the walking path. She looked nervous, almost afraid to come closer. John smiled and waved gently. "You're welcome to join us." The woman hesitated before, slowly walking over. Her name was Eleanor. She was 74 years old and had recently moved into town after losing her husband. She admitted she had not spoken to anyone socially in nearly 6 months. "I forgot what it feels like to belong somewhere," she said quietly. Nobody laughed. Nobody judged her, because everyone sitting there understood that feeling. That morning, Eleanor smiled for the first time in a long while. As weeks passed, the small gathering became known across town. Local people started calling it the Morning Circle. Students sometimes stopped by before school just to listen to old stories. Young parents brought children to meet the seniors. People who once felt invisible were now being seen again. One afternoon, a teenage boy sat beside John after the group ended. "Can I ask you something?" the boy said. John nodded. "How do you stay positive at your age?" John smiled softly before answering. "You think positivity comes from having an easy life. It doesn't. It comes from deciding not to give up on life." The boy stayed quiet. Then John continued, "When you're young, you think purpose is about chasing big dreams. But when you grow older, you realize purpose is often much smaller and much more powerful." The boy looked confused. John pointed toward the group. "Sometimes purpose is simply making sure another person does not feel alone." Those words stayed with the boy. And honestly, they stayed with everyone who heard them. But life still brought challenges. One evening, Walter did not show up. That was unusual. John became worried and visited Walter's apartment later that night. He found his friend sitting quietly in darkness. Walter looked weak. The doctor had discovered heart problems. "I'm tired, John," Walter admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if this is all too late for me." John sat beside him silently for a moment. Then he said something powerful. "You know what I've learned? As long as we wake up in the morning, life is still asking something from us." Walter looked at him carefully. John continued, "We may walk slower now. We may look older. But our hearts still matter. Our stories still matter. Our presence still matters." Tears filled Walter's eyes. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief, because someone understood him. John visited Walter every day after that. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply sat quietly together. And slowly, Walter became stronger again. One morning, weeks later, Walter returned to the park. The entire group applauded when they saw him. Walter laughed harder than anyone. At that moment, John realized something incredible. People do not survive because life becomes perfect. People survive because someone gives them a reason to keep going. Months passed. Spring finally returned. Flowers bloomed again around the park, and sunlight filled the air with warmth. The morning circle had now grown larger than John ever imagined. Nearly 30 seniors gathered every week. Some came with walkers. Some arrived slowly with canes. Some carried deep pain hidden behind quiet smiles. But when they sat together, something changed. They no longer felt forgotten. One local community center invited John to give a short speech about aging and loneliness. At first, he refused. "I'm not a speaker," he said. But eventually, the group convinced him. The room was full that evening. Seniors sat quietly listening. Young people stood near the back walls. John walked slowly to the microphone, nervous and unsure. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he took a deep breath. "I used to think my life ended when I retired," he began. The room became silent. "I thought getting older meant becoming less important, less useful, less seen." Many people lowered their eyes because they understood exactly what he meant. John continued speaking from his heart. "But I was wrong." He paused. "The truth is, life does not stop needing you because your hair turns gray." Some people smiled softly. John's voice became emotional. "There are people in this world right now who need your kindness, your wisdom, your story, your smile, maybe even your survival." A woman in the front row wiped away tears. John looked around the room carefully. "If you woke up this morning, then your life still has purpose." Silence filled the room again. Powerful silence. The kind of silence that touches the soul. Then John smiled gently and said the words that would later spread all across town. "Do not count the years you have lost. Count the lives you can still touch." The audience stood and applauded. Some cried openly. Others hugged one another. But John simply stood there quietly, overwhelmed by emotion. Because the man who once believed his life was finished had now become a light for others. Later that night, John returned home, exhausted but peaceful. He sat near the same window where he once felt hopeless and forgotten. Outside, the town lights glowed softly in the darkness. John thought about the journey he had taken. Not a journey across countries, not a journey toward money or fame, but a journey back toward life itself. He realized something important. A meaningful life is not measured by how young you are. It is measured by how much love you continue to give. The next morning, John woke up before sunrise again. But this time, he smiled the moment his eyes opened, because he had somewhere to go, people waiting for him, lives connected to his. And for the first time in many years, growing older no longer felt like losing life. It felt like understanding life. So if you are watching this today and you feel too old, too tired, too forgotten, remember this story. Your best chapter may not be behind you. It may still be waiting for you tomorrow morning. You are not finished. You are not invisible. And you are never too old to wake up with purpose again. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may need encouragement today, and subscribe to the channel for more motivational stories that remind us all that life still matters at every age.